Sup Shredders, my name is Logan aka Spiderhands and welcome to an SP Reacts, where today we got ourselves an album from an act named Jody Ellis titled Ethereal. And if we switch over to here, we got ourselves the website, the main website for Jody Ellis as a musician. Apparently Jody Ellis is a versatile and accomplished musician, entrepreneur and professional based in the interior of Alaska. With a lifetime of experience playing music and developing technical expertise, Jody has built a reputation as a multi-instrumentalist and composer of world-class music. I do appreciate when people have a website. We're actually going to be checking out their album, as I mentioned, Ethereal here, which is on their website. A total of 11 tracks here, if I'm not mistaken. Oh no, there's 12 here, Ganymede down the bottom, that's good. See, that's the thing, I'm glad I caught that, because I wouldn't have known that there was 12 there. I should note this isn't the first time I've checked out Jody's music. We previously had their EP Dissonant Vibrations, which I reviewed a while ago now, but good to check out more. We're going to listen through each of these 12 tracks from start till finish, and we're going to hear what we think. We'll see if we can get that a bit bigger on the screen, and let's do it. Kraven, and track number 1. I press space. Oh, okay, cool. Nice to have the synths. Cars and it's push, but I don't necessarily mind that. To the original concept. We're fairly comfortable with this theme at this stage. Yeah, that's a bit better. It's been a while since I've had to turn the headphones down. That's not due to a sort of me disliking the song, by the way. It's just because when we listen to music, it's important that we try and have it at a level that isn't too overwhelming so that we can accurately assess like the leveling of things from a post-production perspective. It's why when you go into a recording studio, some engineers would deliberately play the track louder than you might expect so that they can kind of mask any sort of like EQ inconsistencies there and kind of mask a poor effort on their part. But here we have a wonderful production and this is the, my first sort of song conclusion. I'm going to do one of these at the end of each of these 12 tracks. We'll go through, and this being an instrumental, there might not be lyrics and vocals, but there'll definitely be all the way to studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. But before we go any further, what do we think this track is about? I think given the storm that we have on the art there, I'll try to remember to show it up there. There's this big storm that's coming. I'm not necessarily sure what Kraven means in terms of the title. Apparently, Kraven is an enemy in the Spider-Man universe, if I'm not mistaken there. I don't necessarily think it's related to this. Regardless, it's an interesting title and evokes intrigue there. With an instrumental track, what you really need, even if it's a shorter form factor within that 2 to 4 minute sweet spot like Kraven is, you need to have a substantial enough amount of interesting components within it to carry the listener through there. And I feel that we have this within this track alone. If we go back to the start of proceedings, you have that foley there with the rain, the storm sounds, and it tells you about the track without you, and as well as the thunder, you know, it tells you about the song without you necessarily needing to diagnose anything further. You can tell a storm is coming there. And when you consider the instrumental elements within it, the drums, the guitars, some of those other elements there, it makes sense that those would go together. You know, you can kind of imagine the force of that behind some of those guitar sounds, the distortion, the crispiness kind of be as fiery as the thunder in the sky. But there's also this interesting chorus and manipulation of the tone of the guitars where they kind of chime there, and it adds a sort of a more ethereal, outer world element there. We also have like a harmony going on there, which kind of reminded me a little bit of the tone of Metallica's One, if I'm honest there, but then we went, of course, in a different direction. I'm not trying to say we plagiarized anything. I just dig the fact that we're not too eager to separate ourselves from the from the rain. We allow the guitars to sit in within that with a fairly easy to follow melodic motif there. That loops around really satisfyingly. And as you have some of those pads come in the mid-range there to add more of a low end to some of those chimier elements there, the frequency spectrum starts to fill up and it starts to sound more complete. When we come in with those drum elements there nicely phrased around the stereo field, left and right sides of the cans there's some 16th notes that are either played or ghost noted with the second alternates, or they have some sort of repeaters on them, which is kind of sick. I like the way that's positioned. And with several different chord progressions and bass lines throughout this piece there to highlight different elements there, with some interesting synth leads to add a bit of buzziness to it and a bit of intrigue, because some of the chord progressions that we have in these melodic ideas there add a sense of uncertainty and drama to the overall feel of the piece. It's just nice to have that bit of tension for a while, but then kind of resolve to the minor in a way that isn't too awkward. It illustrates a firm sense of musical theory and composition. And as we go between those different sides of the coin there, you eventually end the piece there feeling like you've learned something but not necessarily sure how it relates to the context of the overall album. I do like the individual tones and textures of the instruments though. They niche quite well there, not only from a composition perspective but also production one. It seems like the instruments are well aware of each other and are trying to play similar rhythms and melodies and harmonies and bass lines to be able to facilitate each other. So that's great in terms of the makeup of it. And I think that the lack of drums in some parts allows things to be a bit more sort of floaty and adds a sense of dynamic range to the piece, with things still being quite tight when they do appear. Even though I mentioned that the mix itself was loud, things don't feel too choked or over compressed there. You can hear the different parts and appreciate them. I just like the way that the guitars go from the left to right side of the stereo field, some of those pads, how they reverberate and warble around the place there. It's interesting sound design. And how we have these reverb tails to make things sound sort of eerie and otherworldly, you know, like powerful, and how the rain comes in at the end to sort of cater us out. And they just fade out at the end. You know, it's fascinating. Thematically, it's minor leaning there. I assume we have a sense of tension and uncertainty about what we're discussing within this without the words involved. Ultimately, I feel when we go into that second chord progression motif, it's almost like it's fighting back against it, but we kind of come back down to earth and left in a similar position there, kind of sifting through our own thoughts on the environment. But yeah, I feel like we not only work within a diatonic there, we don't necessarily explore chromatics, but there's extensions of those harmonies which adds a sense of further emotional nuance and sophistication to it. And ultimately, yeah, it's more about the journey you take with a through composed track like this as opposed to sort of oscillating around a core message lyrically, which I think that in terms of itself as an instrumental, it's quite well balanced. From a studio recording, mixing and mastering perspective, I feel like this is also very solid. Again, it's a loud track, but it's not overcompressed. There's a sense of dynamic range to it. I like how things fade out with automation at the end. I like the automation of panning of different positions of things within the stereo field as well as how things are spread out with the mixture of guitar, bass, synth, drum, and sort of like Foley, like rain textures, as well as the thunderstorm and stuff like that. Nice loud bus compression limiting is handled, and we're off to a great start. We've got Solace, track number 2. I wonder if we're going to have similar instruments between the tracks or if they're going to be completely different. kind of relaxing, isn't it? Nice use of a riser then to come out of it. See, that was a really sick little drum break there, on the hi-hats. The switch up the fill and cadence of it, or the rhythm cadence, should I say. It seemed like we were going somewhere else with it though, eh? I feel like we could have potentially... No, see, I'm in two minds about that one. Like, not the track itself, because I really did enjoy myself with it. I got kind of lost in it at one point, but it's more how it ends and how it fades itself out deliberately. It's almost like it wants to go somewhere else, but it knows that it's overstayed its welcome, or we didn't necessarily know how to end it. Regardless, I think that Solace there is another effective track within this. I'm not necessarily sure how it relates to Kraven. It's out from like some of the similar sort of like textures and tonalities in the prior, as well as a consistency with the production quality and sort of like aesthetic of it. I like the fact that it's, like avidly mysterious. Solace being consolation and sorrow, something along those lines. It does, fit the minor orient really neatly there. There are parts of it which sound both relaxing as well as in a minor key that sort of like works with it. So like at face value, without any words being spoken, you can kind of more easily identify the connection between the name of it and what's going on. You have like this interesting start to it though, with a similar length to the previous track. We have these guitars or synth layers kind of warbling in and out, but coming out of nowhere there, and it's very sort of uncertain at this point exactly what we're trying to accomplish. With other little bits of ear candy like the fluttering of some of the synths in like the background there, and maybe we're assuming at this point that because of the intricacy of the composition of the previous track, we can get away with putting more in here, because I feel like we do. I like the mixture of different snare sort of flam filled, as well as the adjustments and polyrhythms and some of the hi-hat parts, the on beats and sort of syncopated parts of the cymbal work on the drum kit there. I think throughout the piece is quite effective. But it's just here I notice some of those transitions are wonderful. We really are trying to min-max this. At least to a certain extent. There are some fun synths like the wow around like the 11-second mark there, where it has a portamento sliding up into its note there, and it's just a very kind of cool sound there, where it doesn't start with the resolving note or the kind of comfortable note. It kind of sinks into that there in a way that's almost sort of playful. It kind of reminds me of a lot of 90s video games, with other sort of synth flutters going upwards as well, and there being rises as well, and all sorts of fun ideas just to sort of shift and shape and create this aural aesthetic that kind of compels you through it. It's more of what we had in the previous track in a way that's satisfying. We have the frequency spectrum filled up as well, and we have those higher sort of pads or strings coming around the 40-second mark there. It's a natural build towards something, a higher purpose there. almost like we're looking up for support. And I think as we continue through the piece with a mixture of hi-hat and ride elements there dictating differences between them, as well as a variety of different sounds that come and go throughout the piece there, it's almost like the groove is the constant. It's like we're surrounded by all these different feelings and thoughts with the extensions within the harmonies, and we're not really sure what to make of it, but we know we're going somewhere important regardless. But just these wonderful, beautiful, sparkly synth leads and keys there that really sort of make you feel like you're walking through this magical pathway, enveloped in like a very sort of cozy blanket and a sort. There's nothing that's confrontational or sort of like disarming about this. Ironically, probably it being disarming because of the lack of edge to it. But then when we consider the subject matter, the title of it, that might not necessarily seem particularly relevant or important. But I just like the fact that even if we're working with some 8-string guitars in the low end there, even if we're working the bass and drums into it and kind of pushing forward like that, it's just very well rounded in regard to an overall structuring and layering perspective there, with some sub layers that invite you to look further into it and add a further sense of dimensionality to it. And it's just great to have the recognition and understanding that these elements need to feed off of each other and not just be together all the time, that we need to call and respond and do other fun ideas as well. It's a very cool song, and we clearly understand what we're doing here. Thematically, minor leaning, but in a way where it's almost too cool to be sad about its own situation there. Some of the extensions within the harmonies that we have there are really pretty and really sort of soothing, and I think that's kind of what you need from this kind of song as well, just after the last track where we showed maybe some sort of toolish kind of proggy progressions there, which isn't a bad thing. It's just that if you have a different angle to this second track, people understand there's going to be more instrumental diversity within it. So allowing ourselves to preside over a familiar and predictable bass line, but then to have all this extra excitement on top of it there, it just makes for an elevated, transcendent experience. And as we go through it, the studio production, recording, mixing, and mastering is much the same. We're bereft of a lead vocal or something to kind of take us through it, but we don't need that. Where we're not wanting or needing more, we have enough in regard to what we're supplied with there in order to be able to identify with it. So the last thing we need is effectively just to have things around us in the stereo field, to have interesting things going with the automation of the volume of things and some of the panning stuff, less so than the previous track, if I'm not mistaken, but just to maintain that dynamic range that everyone's going to quiet loud notes, knowing to have stuff more subtly, knowing to have stuff a bit more kind of build, and to come in and out when required in order to make things special. And we handle that in spades here. Again, I'm still not entirely sure about the fade out at the end, but I think that's primarily because I was just enjoying wherever we get taken with this music at this point, like unconditionally and without bias. It's very neat, and I don't feel like we needed to add anything or take anything away from this in order to it's just very cool. Adventure, track number 3. What have we got? This is fun. This is a nice album to listen to on a Sunday. Kind of sounds like one of those soundtracks you'd listen to whilst you're going through like a movie, not museum or something like that, or like in a documentary or a film or something like that. I would say this kind of cyberpunk aesthetic, but that could potentially be a bit too obvious or pallid. I do wonder if we are pushing against the limiter a bit firmly though. I feel like we've mixed it with the expectation to make it incredibly loud, like -5 LUFS or something like that. No, I think it sounds great, don't get me wrong. It's difficult to mix like this. See, that's the way that sequence of that percussion fades in and out is just wonderful, man. Like there's a panning to the drums, I think, to make them less intense in the low end. Like there's still a low end to it, but they're not like doofy kicks, are they? They're like clicky ones. It's a side chain more effectively. Yeah, that was fantastic. It's just, honestly, it's just another really well-designed, really well-intentioned piece of music. I think, you know, with Venture being a track about going forth on some sort of adventure there, that could potentially be what we do after we've found Solace. You know, we've come to terms with the effect that, or the activity or whatever's caused their need for that Solace, and we're off somewhere differently. And I think that a lot of the higher elements there kind of sound like thunder strikes coming down from the heavens there as the person walks. Again, as per the art there's really interesting ideas presented there. I do like it. It's just a further example of that fact that you do not need to have vocal guidance when your music is well written there. You know, I listened to that starting point there with the way that those pads and those sort of choirish kind of drones come out of nowhere, and it's like, holy crap, what is this? But then it spreads around the stereo field and almost sounds like it could be sort of dubstep-ish, you know? Like, I like the fact that it is so inherently intense at the beginning there, but with so much ambiguity as well. You know, those relatively sort of palatable dun-dun-dun-dun synth sequences there are inoffensive, yet, you know, like when everything else is added, it's almost like a part of a meal that is more important when things are sort of like, when it's building something on top of it. I do dig, again, the fact that we have the panning and sort of filtering on that drum with that specific kick tone. I know I mentioned that within the listening experience, but it was like, I do dig that we deliberately try to have it less bombastic. We're acutely aware of how to choose sounds that will work well with each other, and if you'd had too much low end in that kick, it might have messed with the bass response or something and just created some awkward resonant frequencies there. So I'm glad that we're being sort of like considerate of that. You know, we have these sort of sub-arpeggios on the sides of the stereo field, such as around the 45, 47 mark there, with some sort of plucked sort of elements there. And they're a nice contrast to the more sort of verbose, long-standing pads and squealy sounds like synths around that. Like, we have things that are performing different functions but coexisting together regardless. And there's like a guitar or something like that with some fun ideas going on there, almost like a solo section. Like, we could have potentially have had like a solo, I think, through this if we didn't already have a solo part already, or if that lead wasn't a solo. But I just think, you know, it's more that these are just individual elements that are adding to it as opposed to trying to take the reins, so to speak. The use of the those kind of fast hits that you have there around the 1:45 mark there almost add a sense of further pace to it, like you're running somewhere there. You can imagine listening to it like a scenario where, you know, you got someone going through the mountains or something like that, or going up a snowy hill or something along those lines. I just, you know, the fact that you can imagine it or even want to relate to the music in that response is indicative of the quality of it. And as we have more of the similar drum elements and tones and stuff like that, as well as the iridescent synth leads and pads and basses and stuff like that, you have this culmination at the end with some sort of tension with some of those buzzy leads on the synths at the 2:30 mark there, and you come back down with the 8th note, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and or it could even be 16th, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 and a 4 and it depends on, like, I think it's probably the 16th note groove, but just the way we know to kind of build up and then sort of resolve and come back down there and fade out is just tremendous. And so, yeah, I'm happy to be listening to this. All of these tracks are through composed at this point, if I'm not mistaken. So every one of them is technically an adventure, at least from a musical perspective there. But just compositionally, I like the tonal consistency across these tracks so far. I think that the minor key element is potentially something we're going to have throughout all of this. It just simply could be because when you have those themes associated with the minor keys and scales there, they objectively just sound cooler because it's less cheesy, I suppose. But then me saying that, I have to substantiate how things are cheesy, undercut the gravity of the situation, I suppose. It's almost like it's cool because you're trying to find some sort of power within the darkness of it. I think that's effectively my best guess at that, you know. Sometimes as a reviewer, I walk into logic traps and I need to find my way out of them, but ultimately just, yeah, really neat song. And I think that that main sort of progression, if I'm not mistaken, that we have throughout the whole time evolves enough throughout the various layering adjustments and decisions and performance elements there that it works, you know, across the 3 minutes. Studio recording, mixing and mastering, similar comments in regards to the use of sequences there for a specific sort of groove there, a slow 16th note across the barren tempo there, with the drums playing in time with that, with a sense of rhythmic cohesion and unison. Not all the time. We did have some 30 seconds as well there, I should know that. That 145 point is 30 seconds, and that's kind of a rare thing. You don't really see 30 seconds in music nowadays just because, I mean, 30 seconds are difficult to play, right? But if you have like an electronic sequencer or something that can do that for you, then clearly it's a bit more sort of like feasible. But yeah, honestly, nice and loud. Music surrounds you in headphones, nice fade out at the end. No real complaints for me, honestly. Again, not lacking from a lack of vocals. Just another interesting element to this Ethereal adventure. Speaking of which, we have Ethereal, the title track itself. Oof, the wind. It does sound like you're climbing a mountain, doesn't it? If I'm not mistaken, I think we've had a similar progression. Oh no, we haven't. No, never mind, it changed. I think not going down for attempting Phrygian means we can go back more easily up to that root note at the top, so that's fine. I do think we'd go down at that point, and it'd be fair. Great adjustment there on the feel of the personality of it. I like the chromaticism there, the modulation, that's really neat. Legend. Yeah, that's great. I like the use of the Foley there. I think the wind sounds are wonderful. It's just great to have an additional bit of context there to let you know where you're at in the journey. And it's not something we have with all the songs either, so it's not overplayed. So Ethereal is apparently of the heavens, or extremely light, or delicate if I'm not mistaken there. So I assume again via the album art they were going towards a higher power, or that a lot of this is surrounding a higher power. It's interesting. Primarily because with the wind there, it's almost like you're climbing a mountain to get closer to them. I feel like that's just such a cool thing to be able to pick up without needing to be told a single word. Aside from the title, it's just great to be able to have enough pieces visible to sort of be able to imagine or form a bridge with the rest. Again, you have the drone of the bass there, the warm, and you have the wind kind of fluctuating over top there, and there's a sense of life to it because of how the sample adjusts. It could even be a synth that you've got a noise filter on or something within something that's kind of like randomly adjusting the parameters of it with the rain, I think, as well. But either way, it's great, you know. They have these wow, wow, wow parts in the background there, forming a further sense of rhythm in it. And when the drums kind of eventually adding some cymbals with a fill to go into the next part. You just get a few of the existing elements that offer enough time to be sort of mystified by the new bits. I like the fact that the drums don't just feel the need to go kick and snare and kick and snare. They go dun dun dun, you know, they have fun with the placement of some of those snares and switch up the phrasing of some of those rhythm lines. And it's also cool in this track to have a couple of different chord progressions, including the one that did some modulations through chromatic chords, added a bit of sort of spice and edge to it there. It's kind of nice to do something different at this point in the album, even after only hearing the previous 3 tracks there, just to know we're going to have further changes and adjustments and to not get too used to things. I kind of dig that we're working with synths as opposed to guitars from what I can tell. I mean, we might be working with guitars in some elements, but you could also have a lot of these as being synthesized. That, like, uncertainty is intriguing, and it's not an easy thing to be able to sort of, you know, like equate or attribute, because often there's something that kind of gives away that it's a guitar, for example, or something along those lines. But there are parts where I'm genuinely unsure about what we're doing and how we're doing it. And for me to feel sort of confused or uncertain about something that's happening in a track is objectively, it's an ability for me to learn as well. I'm being exposed to new things, and I dig that. It's just nice to have a similar pace it's just nice to have a similar pace and intensity to the different secondary chord progression that I mentioned prior to the first, because even if we're using different chords, it doesn't feel too alien or sort of disparate from it. But just, it's great to have some additional tom fills and drum parts, you know, two-handed hits there, and to explore the rest of the drum kit as well and to not rely on that too much. Outside of that, a lot of it is fairly, and I mean this in a positive way, rudimentary, in the sense that we don't need to have everything doing really sophisticated things all the time. It's more like we're just sort of supporting the prominent elements to give them further harmonic context, whilst, you know, like making the track sound huge when we need to as well, within the realms of the fade outs and fade ins, etc. And you know, and for the track to finish on that it almost finishes on a diminished triad, if I'm not mistaken there, which is sort of surreal because it's so unresolved, you know. It really does not sort of indicate where it's going next. But I think like what's interesting is that the leveling in general is quite good, you know, from a studio production recording perspective. I know I'm kind of going all over the place with this one. There's just a lot of thoughts that come to my mind with it, especially as I'm feeling more comfortable with stating up front that, again, you have a minor key to this with the inclusion of those chromatic sort of chords there, adding a sort of sense of dread to it before we go down with it. It's just that we have consistently solid limiting, you know, and mixing and leveling, and the music surrounds you in the headphones there. The Foley use of the wind sounds is great because that kind of sounds like a real storm, even if they've managed to make those sounds via synthesizer with noise generators or something like that. Nice loud bit of pumping, bus compression, limiting is handled. It's a song where, again, I'm used to how it sounds at this point, but I like the slight adjustments they make throughout. And I mean, to be fair, slight adjustments is a little bit facetious, and I don't mean in that way. It's more that, for me, I can hear that this album is connected via its various sort of tracks, so they're not completely separate, or they're similar, they're not dissimilar. But there's no point that I'm going back to and thinking, wow, this could have been done differently, or this could have improved, primarily because everything that I've listened to so far sounds really dope. And it's so refreshing to listen to people that genuinely care about what they're doing with their music. You just cannot take that for granted nowadays. So ultimately, I think a very simple theme there with individual instruments playing separate parts that niche well together. An overall 16-note groove to it in halftime as per previous tracks. No complaints on my end, you know. No need for vocals. We got a lot of the story as needed. Impassioned though, track number 5. Yay, a major one. Are we gonna have vocals? Because I heard a breath, right? It's a long song to not. Yeah, interesting. Is the breathing like an instrumental sound, or is it going somewhere? Great return of the strings, though. They love the little tippy taps, don't they? Oh, is that done? Oh, okay. That might have just been finished about 3:05. That's interesting. So it's not that long. That's okay. So Impassioned. I like that it was in a major tone. I think that when we are passionate about something, then it can be a positive thing. Maybe we have found the reason to care about what we're concerned about. Maybe after going through the trials and tribulations of what we went through with the wind and Ethereal, we're coming out of the storm a better, stronger person. I'm not quite sure. But just, you know, to enter with that major tonality at this near halfway point of the album insinuates that maybe we're going in a better direction. Maybe things are going to come up. And what I meant about like the major being kind of cheesy before is not that anything that's in the major key is inherently cheesy. It's more that like if it's just major chords, it's just such a common thing that it almost becomes repulsive, if that makes sense. It's just automatically you almost hear it as too much that you just know they're kind of phoning it in. I think that's more what I'm getting at there. I don't know, it's hard to discuss that. That's clearly not the issue we have here though. There is enough sort of nuance and interesting note choices within this to make this a compelling listen throughout the whole of it. And I like the fact that it builds itself up again and doesn't just kind of stab at you with its sounds. The way that things flutter left and right, and you've got that interesting sort of melodic motif at the start there, which by itself is kind of cool. It has that little tail with the 16th notes on it. But the vast majority of this album being sort of like, if I'm not mistaken, the vast majority of this album being 16s. It's just great to have those drums come in, form a similar function, sort of focusing on the chord note groove there in halftime. Nice and powerful and punchy with its positioning there, with the sort of the bass sequences and the low end providing that more sort of like cyberpunkish futuristic sort of aesthetic to it. But we also allow ourselves to sit there without any drums occasionally as well, to allow things to kind of transfer and to allow us into dynamic range. And I think as well, the way that we have the drums, you know, adjust their groove and cadence, you know, with the different sort of kick patterns and snare elements there and the tails. Again, it's something I mentioned before, but it's just something we do not sleep on. It's worth mentioning for this track as well as any others we come across. I think the tippy taps, first the 30-second sort of sequences I mentioned there, which if I'm honest there, it kind of sounds like it could be, there's this plugin from UJam that was a set of tools that, there's a famous composer, he made a set for UJam But I'm wondering if it's those ones. He's got like perks or something like that. He's got like perks that he put via UGem. Yeah, I'm wondering if those are the drums we've got here. Because if that's the case, that's really cool. And it's just nice to have a different drum kit, to not be too used to the same groove there, to allow a different feeling thing, especially if it's got a faster one. Because it's tied into other tracks within the album there, like included within it, you can have further connection between them. But yeah, thematically, it's great to have that major leaning there. It's kind of refreshing there with enough sort of nuance there harmonically with some of those extensions there to understand that it's not a completely happy experience there. It's more like we're going slightly, it's taking a slightly less negative perception of it maybe. But regardless, you know, really cool track. And it's just nice to have those moments of calm and dynamic range there to allow you to appreciate the finer elements there. Studio recording, mixing and mastering again. It's great to have the track come up with the automation of the volume, then to kind of come away again at the end. It's got a natural sort of bell curve where these different chapters come in and out of each other. And I think there's just nice pumping to the drum kits as well as just a really effective production on the drum kit there. I feel like the reverbs that you got on there, as well as some of the bus compression, just allows everything to kind of sound boxy, but in a really sort of positive way. Again, because I've turned my headphones down, I don't know what this sounds like at a quote-unquote normal volume, but nonetheless I can appreciate at a quiet perspective that it is quite well sort of produced. Nice and loud bus compression limiting is handled. And then we've just got Whisper, track number 6, before I have my little mid-recording break. Just a 5-minute one so I can walk around, you know. Interesting tone to the drums. Like a slapback delay to the drums or something like that. Having the whispers at the start was cool though. Boom, 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 boom. Huge pulse to those 4 toms, eh? I like that we've played the drums as well. I can hear that we've done that. That flanger on that guitar is heavy, dude. Great to have more vocal elements like that cool over top. The whispers are unsettling though, right? I'm not sure why there's whispers, but there are. So there are whispers in this song titled Whispers. I like that they're not saying things, that they're more sort of the sound of whispers as opposed to trying to tell you words. Having a lack of knowing what this album is really well about up until this point, kind of, maybe you just feel like at the 6th track we don't necessarily need to be told it sort of like in a straightforward manner. So that that sort of curiosity is welcome. But I just like the fact that we start with a different sound or perceived lead, even if it's moving around the place and doing some sort of like twisted kind of things. We also have those vocals calling out as well at some point over the 2-minute mark, which was kind of dope. It's just great to have new things being included at this stage, at the halfway point. I don't take that for granted, especially because I'm quite used to the sound of some of those key elements there, the progressions, even though this is the second one, I think, in a major key, which is, again, more than welcome. It's nice to have a more sort of uplifting track in there as well after the first. I wasn't sure if it was going to be a once-off or not. I'm kind of glad that it isn't. I like that. You know, with the drums playing a mixture of familiar quarters-eighths triplet, not necessarily triplets, actually 16ths, as well as maybe some on-beats syncopated grooves as well, and a variety of different fills. You know, typically working within that half time with the snares still offbeat, but like on the 4. But just to have pauses where there's very little drums, but the whispers are more sort of a rhythmic texture, and then the hi-hats come in afterwards, and you're kind of flown back into the array of it. It's just kind of fascinating inherently, you know? To have the toms, though, around the 25-second mark is kind of dope there. I mean, we had that as an extended kind of part of it, and it was just neat to have that kind of dull to it as like a different sound within the piece as well. We really are still trying to, again, include different things at this point there. And, you know, the floor tom specifically is a good sort of viable alternate for the cymbal if you're looking for something a bit different in terms of percussion. But you've got this kind of, these leads writhing over top of it there, and you've got the guitars with the flanger wow over top in the late stages there, differentiating the track texturally. And you've got these kind of peaks and troughs there dynamically with when the whispers come in and out. And you've got like the strings as well. The tension is palpable with those, the way they push at the limiter a bit further than it maybe already is. And you're just kind of left feeling like we're in a really comfortable, cozy pace in regards to how we're layering things at this point. We're making great use of that 3-minute 17. There's no issues there and no filler there. They're just 6 so far out of 12. These 6 have been really neatly isolated concepts there, getting the most out of the instruments that are presented, with the drums doing the vast majority of the work, but also all the other components there, exploring kind of catchy, sort of custom, sort of per track, you know, individual motifs with adjustments of bass lines there to not try and make them too played out, and a mixture of sort of major and minor keys thematically that allows you to feel like to actually feel like you're kind of soothed a little bit and amongst the, oh, but what is this, you know? Then nothing within this album so far has been super hard, depressing, and sort of difficult to listen to. And that's kind of a blessing, because I feel like with instrumental music, if it's directly challenging, you've got nothing else to really cling on to, do you? I'll note that there was a couple of like these like slapback delays in some of the drums or some of the chimey parts there that maybe like rhythmically was a little bit kind of like it was noticeable, not because it was played poorly, because I could tell that was affecting their perception of how they came together rhythmically. But I think once I got used to it and like allowed myself to sort of be with the music, it was totally fine. Yeah. Another solid track. It was great to have the whispers at the end there. And just, yeah, from a studio production, recording, mixing, mastering perspective, it was just kind of neat to have the whispers both be perceptive and also not too much within it. You can tell that, again, the limiter is pushed and it's quite a loud recording in general there at master. But nonetheless, it's just great to have those adjustments of different like elements within it there, as well as the different panning positions of those whispers and the vocals calling out near the end as well. It's a great time, and I'll be back just in a moment there for tracks 7 through 12. We have track number 7 now, Interceptor. There we are. Ooh. It's funky as hell, man. just a fun concept, eh? Hey. Yay, back into that. Nice. It's just filthy. It's just a fun idea, you know, rhythmically and tonally with that. And the riser and drums filter us out. Sick, that's cool. Interceptor, track number 7. I'm not sure what was trying to intercept them, but all I know is they're having a fun time doing it because that's a sick synth sound like that. I just like the way that when it enters, there's a little drum fill and then bum, ba, 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 ba. I mean, that's my favorite, probably one of my favorite songs so far within this album, if I'm honest. It's like the power of a fun sound, but just the innate tension you get, that drama suspense of things rising up at the beginning with the hi-hats is also quite palpable, you know. There's another example of when you have certain instrumental elements within it, kind of creating a captivating enough experience. You don't need further storytelling with a main sort of dominant lead on top. And the keys on outside of that kind of really funky bass line there, with sort of a mixture of different sort of like melodies and arpeggios there. The keys on the side of that twinkle on the other hand, and they just are super, they glow really prettily in the mid-range. It's very pleasant. No, and they kind of provide a counter rhythm and a counterpoint to what's going on with the bass there, with the drums facilitating with a mixture of on beats and syncopated to kind of keep the groove going. I think it's halftime there. No, it's normal time, isn't it? 1 and a 2 and a, yeah. It's just great to have that focus on the groove and feel and flow of it with this one, you know. A coloration within the harmonies and melodies is fine there, and dynamics are great, but it's also about the funk of it. Around that 145 mark where you separate yourself from it and you go to a mid-range sequence there and you have those synth keys pushing you upwards with a different chord progression and bass line. You're not really sure where you're heading after that, but you do feel like you're having an elevated experience regardless, and you're patient with it primarily because of the good time that you had beforehand. You know, before you go into that riser and then you go back into the drum fill with the snares and toms and go bum ba bum ba bum ba bum ba bum bum. And you have the guitars come back in around the 3-minute mark as well there, and that's cool for an extra kind of glowy fizzy texture in the mix. But it's just, it's knowing what your main part is and how allowing other parts to decorate and sort of build alongside it. Yeah, fantastic stuff. Fantastic stuff for sure. Really, really neat. No complaints about that one, if I'm honest with you. No complaints about that one at all. I had a good time with it. That was Interceptor off of this, the 7th track. Thematically, it was minor-leaning, but it was so kind of catchy and bouncy that I adore it. And just in terms of the studio recording, mixing, and mastering, it's just great to allow that funky bass line to have the purpose and push that it did, you know, without being too squeezed in the dynamics. You know, the drums being nicely sidechained allowed for a bit of a bump with it as well. And again, the use of rises to kind of bring up the volume there is just, it's a consistent sort of reliable manipulation that you kind of enjoy experiencing. We got Mystique, track number 8. Sub 2-minute one. It's just fun, man. Probably bringing the guitar in at that point, a bit more kind of oomph to it. This. Oh, we're fading out again. So that was Mystique, track number 8 for today. I do feel like it had a sense of mystique in regard to how the chord progressions and arpeggios and plucked parts were presented there. There were so many different twists and turns there, even through some repetition, that you never really felt like you were going to land somewhere constant or like stable. And I kind of dig that, you know, the kind of exotic sort of sense of those note choices. There's some of the chromaticisms and some of the parallels we had in there as well. It was just cool to play around with expectations and add sort of like a neoclassical feel to it, because you had the fuzziness and the buzziness of that synth bass around it, and there were and the pads as such around it. You had a few of those odd reliables, but it was just kind of neat to have that much variety within those plucked parts there, to kind of go, oh crazy, we're really expanding upon this. And the drums are far more, if I'm not mistaken, I think they're far more steady within this one to provide a sort of a foundation for everything else to dance upon. And I think that's a sensible decision there as we bring those electric guitars back around the 30-second mark there for a bit of extra sort of root note resonance. And, you know, it's more about the focus on those plucks as opposed to the funky bass line we had before. But we also have the synth bass that we have kind of moving alongside as a pedal note alongside the arpeggios on the right there. So it's like we have an awareness of what we need to do to create a sort of more thorough overall cohesion between the elements. But I just like the fact that we are bringing in those kind of like orchestral drums around the 135 mark, harken back, kind of a consistent sort of narrative across the piece there. It's like we're really trying to let you know, hey, this is a shorter piece. We're not cutting out the stops, because it's sub 2 minutes, which can occasionally mean you're losing some important nuance or sort of information there to sort of help tie it together. But ultimately, because of all the stuff we've had so far, it doesn't feel like we're missing anything. I think because of the variety of different chords that were presented within those plucked arpeggiated sections, you really do feel like you got enough from it, regardless of the fact that it was short. And bearing in mind that these tracks do have these sort of like these builds and then these extended fade outs there for like 10 seconds of the piece there. It's a short song, but I don't think it's underdeveloped, and it definitely doesn't overstay its welcome. And it's just, you know, that bomb, bomb as a closing note, just before we talk about the theme and production side of things. Just, I like some of those notes that play or hold over top some of these string or pad sections there that are very sort of spooky sounding. I think the mystique is part of the kind of ghostly, ethereal textures there, more of a kind of an otherworldly presence within the piece there by how they sound, as opposed to just the notes that they resonate with. It's more about the attitude and personality of what's presented than like trying to sort of do crazy stuff with the drums or kind of get you moving like with Interceptor. Ultimately, though, nonetheless satisfying. Thematically, minor leaning, but also some interesting sort of notes outside the diatonic, the minor scale there, which I appreciate. And we had some, again, as I mentioned, some twists and turns with how things. There wasn't like a really reliable chord progression or bass line within this. It was definitively through composed. It's probably one of the more through composed pieces throughout this. And I think in a short form factor, again, it works well. It's not like we ever stay out of welcome. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering, you know, like things are well presented. I like the mixture of more sort of like tangible, solid, lengthy elements and some of the staccato plucked parts. You know, they niche well with each other, and the frequency spectrum as well. Stereo field, there's no resonant frequencies in the frequency spectrum there. I like the sort of video gamey aesthetic of a lot of the tones and textures within this element in terms of the instruments. Primarily because it makes it a bit less severe when you do have some darkness in regards to how things are presented, and without the context of understanding why that might be. You can imagine this in like a video game soundtrack or something like that, and I hope they do explore that if they haven't already. They're quite good at it. But ultimately, yeah, nice and loud bass compression, limiting sound, great automation of volume on the ins and outs, as per the rest of the album, tracks within this album. And yeah, it's neat. It's really cool. Coherence, track number 9. New elements. Great tension with the movements. Bit of stress there, but I like it. Are they meant to be out of time like that? Yeah, that kind of came together at the end. That was a deliberate lack of unison there, I think. I've got some thoughts on that thing, but it's a minor thing. And if I do say anything, you know, constructive about it, it's primarily just because I'm being transparent as a music reviewer. Coherence. So coherence is basically sticking together, you know, the way things are attached to each other, you know, which is interesting because if there's any constructive feedback in my album so far, or my review of this album, I feel as if it would be surrounding the LFO rate of the there, where I think that it chops at what's presented there in a way which is less smooth than the vast majority of the album that we've had so far. I feel like it's done on purpose because we're showing a really firm understanding of how to put all these elements together. So I'm assuming that the discussion of coherence, that is deliberately being antithetical to what the title is suggesting, which is the point of it. You know, because it's important to think about why something sounds the way it is in regards to the title there, and I think that's potentially what shows it. So in that regard, maybe it's about being the one different thing in amongst a lot of other things that are sort of working well together, and maybe that's the change we wanted to create. I'm not quite sure. I like the white though thing at the start, though, that kind of fun vocal kind of squelchy chop though at the start, and the vast majority of you know, other instrumental components to me sound really cool. I think there's a lot of fan favorites. Some of the guitars and bass and drum elements we've had have come in prior there, but it's just good to also be, as I've mentioned in other tracks, and I will continue to say simply for the sake of being relevant and not something you should take for granted. I just like that we're continuing to add new things. I like that we staircase it in quite a steady pace there, and we kind of bring it up and get louder and louder as we go on, but not in a way which feels phoned in or sort of obvious. You know, like there's these unconventional sounds that come together that are more familiar if you listen through the album, but like less familiar to people who haven't, and so that they'll hear this maybe in isolation and go, oh, okay, I see, we're doing some cool stuff here. And if you have listened to the album so up until this point, then you'll understand why it's happening and appreciate that it is consistent. Or ironically, that is coherent. It's yeah, it's distracting when the rate is out with the drums, but that's simply because, again, I feel like it's deliberate in regard to the title there, so that's totally fine if that's the case. Actually makes it more creative. I like the vocal chops that we have over top of the 1:29 mark because they add a sense of otherworldliness to it. It's almost like we're trying to stick to the god that like we're looking up to or something along those lines, or that ethereal sort of being that we're trying to reach, you know, as we kind of splutter around out of rhythm with the things around us. And it's just a nice additional way to sort of like add a higher range texture and further provoke intrigue within the piece, where a lot of it is sort of centered around the mid-range and low with a mixture of, again, guitar, bass, drums, synths, etc. As we leave the track there and have predominantly the sequencer that we've had with the LFO stuff and the drums there, it gets rid of the low end almost entirely there. You're left with the thump of the percussion there, and it seems like your weight has been taken off your shoulder, and you're kind of wondering why that is, but you kind of appreciate that we've been able to go through this in one form and then come out of it in another. And it's just yeah, it's at 2 minutes 21, it's quite well fleshed out. There's no filler within it at all there, and I think that we're really showing and understanding a firm sort of commitment to the bit in terms of the way we write tracks across this album, as well as understanding the point and sort of purpose of instrumentals within themselves. So it's very, very good. Thematically, minor leaning, because I think, again, we are suffering from a potential disillusionment in regards to a potential coherence or lack of it. And I think that the adjustment of the different notes within parts, as well as the layering sort of like shifts, is enough to kind of get us going through without some of the complications in regards to the note choices and extensions and chromatics in the previous track. It's just different types of, you know, fancy, I suppose, for lack of a better word. Studio recording, mixing, mastering is solid. Happy with the way things are produced in general with this. Again, use great use of fade outs, automation, etc. Guitar, bass, drum, synth, pad sequences. New sounds are EQ'd and sort of transferred properly. The reverb tails keep things setting like that one of the same mix. And yeah, no complaints on my god, aside from what I mentioned about the LFO rate. And again, final time, I understand it's probably deliberate. We got Spirals, track number 10. I do like those strings and how they present. Yeah. Reasonable choice to move toward that. I like the vocals. wasn't expecting it, but I like it.
No sense of purpose, lost and alone again. Rise above the chaos. Break through the storm.
I mean, they are stacked neatly. You know, you can hear the vocals in the mix. Okay, continuing. Thumping away.
Whispers like echoes pulling me down. Caught in the spiral, silence the sound. Falling faster, tighter it winds. Lost in the spirals, losing my mind. Rise above the chaos. Break through the storm.
Nice, that's cool. So I just want to check something real quick before we move into the next one. That was Spirals, track number 10. Just full disclosure, you can see there that this track hasn't completely loaded all the way to the end. The same thing happened with Impassioned. Now I've checked Impassioned, the end of Impassioned, to make sure I didn't miss anything, and I don't think I did, but I'm just wondering if the track was meant to be longer than what it made sound up to, because the song for Spirals continues beyond that point there. I was just checking from like the website itself. So just full disclosure, I did check that these tracks were, that I did listen through all of them in full. But yeah, I have definitely listened to Spirals in full. It's cool. It's a cool song. I thought that the vocals in this were a nice addition within it. With the singer can clearly sing, you know, really happy with their work. They had sort of solid vocal technique in their head and chest voice, and their harmonies were beautiful as well. I liked the way that they followed similar kind of interval choices to some of the synth parts we've had in previous tracks, with a sense of sort of like drama and gravity to it that was sort of almost otherworldly and larger than life. I think when I hear this, it sort of sounded like we were going somewhere massive. And like when they talk about the ghosts pulling them down and trying to make sense of the chaos and the storm and the spirals and twisters and everything like that, it kind of gives a sense of context to the rest of the album, was sort of being enough to still leave it like it's enough. I feel like if they'd over explained the album at this point, it might have made you feel a little bit kind of like handheld, I suppose. It's just enough to kind of go, oh, that's the missing pieces, and now we can kind of put it 2 and 3 together, etc., to make 5. But yeah, I feel like this track worked well as an instrumental, but also, again, having the vocal parts elevated it, but not in the way which was detrimental to the listening experience of the rest of the songs within this album. I liked some of the takes where we kind of had the vocals come in and they kind of like crescendoed and then would come into it to kind of introduce the new verse, like around the 3:15 mark. I thought it was a fun production technique there. There was also just a whole lot of familiar elements within it from like a compositional perspective. Like if we go back to the start there, you've got those plucked elements. Oh no, you got the bass, the synth bass, and misremembering things with cymbal shimmers. And the keys, you know, the plucked keys there, kind of sounding a little bit like a guitar, with a sense of, you know, like, again, mystique to it as per previous tracks there, but in a progression that's a bit more easy to sing over, I feel, so that, which is potentially why the vocals were a bit more palatable here. It was cool to have the vocals do a line and then to allow the instruments to kind of call and respond to that, you know, without things being dominated. I also feel like if the vocals had been absolutely everywhere within this track, it would have been like a little bit too much. To allow there to be choir parts as well, such as around the 120 mark, there are some paddish sort of elements there. It's just a nice additional alt vocal texture there where it's not a storytelling device, but it's just a different way of having that layer with what's, you know, keeping it consistent to the initial lead. And as we go into that midsection of 225, we go in a completely different direction with the bass line and progressions, and it just seems like we're having sort of like a moment in the spiral of the storm there, kind of having this sort of like larger than life experience to then kind of go back and sort of ruminate on our situation later on. It's a track that's, you know, effectively split in two, with familiar guitar lines, familiar bass lines there, and the 16th notes that are all pervasive throughout the entirety of the album continuing to be apparent here. But it's just nice for it to sound a little bit surreal there, and like there's more to come, even we have just had the vocals give us more to sort of chew on, so to speak. It's also great to know that Jody Ellis can sort of put forward a piece where we do have something a bit more sort of flexible in regard to the presentation of it. You know, I don't think we would have benefited from having vocals in every one of these tracks, but I was sort of thinking as listening through this that there were, especially if it was like a 5-minute song, because this is longer than 2-4 sweet spot, that is enough sort of real estate to be able to have storytelling in while still appreciating a lot of the other parts that we've had up until this point. You know, there's time to shine, and it doesn't sound disparate from what we've had prior either there. So ultimately, I feel like it was just it was a cool time to introduce a new lead element there. You could have potentially have had like another solo section alongside that, but then we had the choirs and other elements there, and we haven't really had solo sections in other tracks in the first place, so it was more sort of traditional and contemporary in that regard. Solid recording, solid effort, no complaints in my regard. The motif being minor leaning when you consider the subject matter described in the vocals is absolutely fine there, you know. I just like the twists and turns we take with the bass lines and note choices there to sort of illustrate the position that we're in. With a sense of sort of suspense because of how terse a lot of it sounds and how uncomfortable and sort of unpredictable and like tilted things are. And the studio recording, mixing, and mastering, I think generally the leveling is quite good. There's no weird resonances in the free spectrum of the stereo field. I thought, just commenting on the vocals specifically, they were well presented in the mix. They could have potentially been a little bit louder there, but I also feel like the mix is so kind of pushed from a limiting perspective that there might not have been enough room to have had that without things sort of competing or falling off. It would have been like diminishing returns at that stage. Ultimately, the harmonies and melodies came through cleanly within the speakers or headphones, and I just think it was done well. And again, it's just great to try something new and different at this point, so well done. We've got Primus, track number 11 there. Interesting panning of that crash there, eh? Are we rolling into a... No, it's still minor key oriented here, yeah. Yeah, no, I feel like that's a solid effort. I feel like that's a solid effort. I got no real complaints about it. It's an interesting second last track on the album. What does Primus mean, apart from being a band? Apparently, Primus is the first in rank of the Episcopal Bishops of Scotland, so it's another sort of religious figure of sorts, I think, which is interesting considering the subject matter we're discussing here. I dig it. That's a cool title for a song. I like the reference there. And a lot of this is about the storm of religion and how we're feeling swept up on it and higher powers and everything like that without being a direct reference to a specific religion. It's interesting. We've got Primus though, track number 11, back to our instrumentals. At 2 minutes 50, I feel like this is a good length. Again, I appreciate the previous track being longer because there were those different sort of verses and choruses and stuff like that. But here, you know, like the shorter form factor is just more compact, you know. Both are good, don't get me wrong. But just to kind of have that all familiar plucked kind of theme at the start there. Old, nice and presentable, nice and predictable there. Coming back with the favorites, you got that synth bass and the low end there propping it up from a harmonic perspective there, rolling neatly with the root notes. The drums in there with the mixture of sort of crash and sort of cymbal hi-hat oriented kicks and snares with occasional rides and some tom fills as well to boot and transfer between parts. And a couple of bass lines there where you're still, you know, working within the minor key, but they're presented differently. There's just that amount of adjustment needed to be able to kind of keep us going for the 2 minutes 50. I do like, again, that we bring those choirs in the chorus parts, such as around the 40-second mark for an innate sort of brightness. And if we're going for the Primus again, the religious connotation of having the choirs there is totally fine as well. I mean, it's fine regardless, but it just has a bit more sort of like connection there, I suppose. So after the storm, I suppose, we have the people hearkening from the heavens, you know. But it's like a seamless, sort of very smooth, you know, track in terms of how it operates. It's not trying to have too many twists and turns within it. I don't think that's the purpose of it. I think we're heading towards some sort of conclusion at this stage, with the next track being the final track of the album, Ganymede. But it's nice to sort of slow down a little bit with the ride cymbals and that sort of like 222 part with like the offbeats. It's kind of nice to have an offbeat ride part just as a bit of sort of a switch up in terms of the presentation of those cymbals. And we have some additional 16ths or occasional ones as well to sort of switch up the flow and feel of it. And it's just a good sort of A-B flow throughout, but it's sort of innocuous, very pleasant to listen to. It does make me wonder where we're going with this, though, how we are going to conclude things. Thematically, minor leaning, as I mentioned, though, with the key signature, a couple of bass lines or progressions there that are sort of trying to let you know that even though there are some sort of like more glowing aspects to it that were not necessarily presented in a positive direction, this is almost going to sort of be like a Michael Bay film or something like that. And there's a sense of uncertainty sort of attributed to it with like the ambiguity of some of those or elements that we have there. But yeah, honestly, like we had bell trees in the previous track, by the way. I forgot to mention the one before it. I do like the bell trees and sort of sparkly kind of like transfers that we have there. Even if occasionally they're a bit present, it's just nice to again, as I mentioned. I mean, this isn't necessarily so much a new thing, it's just a continuity of prior elements there, knowing we can still stick with what we're comfortable with. But it's not overextending itself there. We're in a safe place at this point of the album. We figure if you're going to get through 11, you're probably going to do 12. And so, yeah, it's great to have two different sort of sides there, seamless transfer. Studio recording, mixing and mastering again, just nice sort of like notching and niching of things within the frequency spectrum, highs, mids, and lows, high mids, low mids, etc. Nothing really competes for your attention in the sense that it's not fighting with each other. Things have a great sort of sense of chemistry. The performance across the board is quite tight. Bus compression limiting is handled there. And we just got one more. Ganymede, track number 12. What will we do with Ganymede? I like the cymbal shimmers as a riser technique, it's cool. I like the heaviness of those guitar synths though, they're great. Ganymede. So apparently Ganymede, Homer of Homer's Odyssey, for example, as I understand it, not The Simpsons. Homer describes Ganymede as the most handsome of mortals and tells the story of how he was abducted by the gods to serve as Zeus's cupbearer in Olympus. So effectively, if we were to take this, it's more the case of we eventually were abducted in our pathway through the storm to a point where we became basically a servant to the gods after all of this, you know. From the start with, you know, like Kraven all the way through to Ganymede, it's our journey to end up in that position of from head to toe. And I kind of find that interesting. It's an interesting angle to approach with the end of a track there. It explains why it's in a minor key, because arguably that is a sad ending to have there. It also explains why the track is kind of ambiguous in regard to the way that it presents itself. It's almost like this is just my life now, so to speak, you know. The track starts with these really kind of like tentative pads and cymbal shimmers, and there's this kind of almost funkish sounding like lead motif there, these chops there that indicate with the filtering a sense of sort of being submerged by something. And as you come in with those distorted guitars there's a sense of heaviness and sort of like heft to it, like it's a larger than life experience that we're having, which I think lends further credence to my sort of understanding of where we're going with this. And as we push forward with those mixture of different sort of like drum grooves and bass lines and those synth chops and stuff like that, you're staircasing it up until the point where you're kind of reaching the pinnacle and the keys come on top, and it just sounds huge sounding. It's the final culmination of everything we've learnt so far, you know? And it's just an interesting sort of intermission to the rest of their life as things fade out at the end there, and we're kind of left with the last symbol shimmer at an impasse there as the kind of fades out into the ether. It's a neat sort of song there. I don't know why I was expecting a bigger finish than this. I appreciate that if you're not paying too much attention to the titles of the songs and what they indicate, then you're potentially going to be left feeling like, oh, that was just the end of it. So I think you really need to understand the titles and what they're trying to say. And I feel like as well, even though we had vocals in track number 10, if you'd had someone talking at this point, it would have been maybe a little bit on the nose as well. So it's a difficult thing to balance, you know, but I just nonetheless, you're rewarded for appreciating from a passive casual perspective. And if you're actively trying to understand it and trying to sort of observe the deeper nuance within it, then I think you're rewarded for that as well to an extent. Nonetheless, you know, with the main sort of proponents outlined, the main components outlined, you have a couple of different movements harmonically within this track from within our perspective that illustrates a sense of grief, I suppose, as well as a furor and power that is, it is symbolic of, I think, the storm that we're in there as it gradually fades away and you've been taken up into the sky with never to return there. I think that's why things fade out and things sort of clear up and go back to dark. And it's actually quite clever when you think about it like that. All the different sort of like implications we've had with the tracks prior to this kind of just fading out into obscurity. It makes sense when you, again, look into it a bit more deeply and understand what's being sort of implied. I think if we'd made this harmony, like, or made sort of chord progression or bass line or sort of things more complicated, it might have raised more questions and answers. So I think that it's cool to sort of approach things the way that we did so. And just from a studio recording, mixing and mastering perspective across this 1 minute 52 track, which is nice and short and just a really sort of like sick isolated concept, like in a sick in a positive way. Yeah, honestly, leveling in general was quite good. I liked how full sounding it was when you had those big guitar sounds in the middle, as well as the bass drums and the keys sort of on top, as well as the synth chops and the little sequence of oscillator going and behind it. It all came together, was really nice and coherent, and it's just came in and out like a bell curve. And you've got yourself the album there. And we're going to talk about it more in the conclusion. Because welcome to the conclusion of my review of this album from an actor named Jody Ellis titled Ethereal. In this section, I'm going to provide an overall album analysis from lyrics and vocals all the way through studio production, as well as any applicable constructive critique, and then finally my general thoughts from a listener's perspective. I also just want to note before I go any further that I have done individual song mini analyses per track, so if you're looking for specific comments, specificity on certain songs, it's worth going to check out those individually. These are, again, my overall thoughts on this. But before we go any further, what do we think this album is about? I think that this is effectively about, assuming that if Jody Ellis is the protagonist or someone is the protagonist, they're basically being sent to serve the gods. It's their understanding of their role, working towards that, all the trials and tribulations and internal conflicts and stuff going on in their head, eventually getting to a point where they go through the storm and get sent up into the heavens to be a part of it at the end before everything fades out. That's my understanding of Ethereal. And I think that you could look at that from the perspective of general sort of religious devotion. It could also be like a one-off thing where simply they have the ability to be part of that, as there's various sort of like mentions of religious, like we have the Primus with the Episcopal bishops of Scotland through to Ganymede with like Greek, mythology or theology. It's just, there's different elements put in here which makes me think it's less of a specific nod towards a type of like ideology or religion, but more towards just a general sort of higher power thing, which I think is actually quite cool. No need to be sort of like reductivist about it. I think we had vocals at one point in track 10 and we sung well and we had really solid vocal technique, and it was great to have that lead perspective in there with some harmonies there, that we had some fun sort of vocal rises before we came into those verses. But I think a lot of the equally sort of like beneficial stuff that went on within this album came through the fact that most were just instrumentals that stood their ground really neatly and amongst the combination. You could kind of pick apart a wave forward, a journey through this, with each of these tracks being composed to varying degrees there. You had a lot of elements that were consistent across the album, which I appreciate, because the last thing you want within an album is to feel like things are disparate and disconnected. And we had these lots of instruments, including guitar, bass, drums, synth keys, pads, risers. We had lots of sounds of like wind as well as rain and thunder and stuff like that, which when you think about the storm being brought up into it, that makes total sense with the storm going away when the person's up there in the sky. And so you bring all those things together, again, not in a way that is sort of implying they're all there all the time in every track, because these songs each have individual sort of like mix-ups and variations of these different elements, the adjustments of layering and stuff through each individual part with several different bass lines or chord progressions per track. But also we add new elements as we go through the album. It's just more that a lot of those things, which are the main components I'll talk about in this section, I suppose, in addition to nods of others, that there's some really sensible decision making here in regards to the composition, songwriting, performance aspect of it, as well as other areas. I think that with these tracks being between like 1 minute 50 all the way up to 4 minutes, it's nice, or 5 minutes should I say, I think for track number 10, which was Spirals, you typically had things very well fleshed out. There was never really any moment where I thought things were superfluous or unnecessary in regards to the things were brought there. Each track sort of had a rise, a crescendo of elements there in many different ways. It could be sequences, it could be the Foley there, it could be other elements there, and the beats and grooves would usually sort of fade out over time at the end as well, like a bell curve for each of the 12 tracks. And that's a sensible way to sort of chapterize the song, I think, or the album, should I say, because if you have things just go smack bang one to the other, it just seems like one massive event, and that can be overwhelming for people, especially if they're not used to instrumental tracks where there isn't as much vocal oriented direction to it, and they're sort of lost in trying to figure out how to swim. It's a song, typically, the things I like the most through this, with the understanding that there's far more nuance to us that I'm going to discuss in this section, while still trying to lend credence to it. The guitars were sick. And by that I mean the guitar synths, and by that I mean, I don't want to start with the guitars. Like, it's just that like I couldn't figure out if there were guitars or like synthy guitars there. There were some flanged guitars that went backwards and forwards and other elements there. There were some guitars that were just down the middle of the mix. That were just huge sounding. There were some sort of plucked elements as well that sounded like guitars, but there could also be key elements there. It's difficult to tell when guitars were guitars, but if they were distorted or clean or had chorus or had other sort of like effects chains on them, they sounded sick. They were either huge sounding when we needed a sense of gravity and sort of quote-unquote epicness to a piece, or they were a bit more sort of subdued and subtle to sort of bring things down a little bit there. But they were perceptible in the track in part due to the production, but also just in general due to the way things were written, with things being sort of taken and given away to sort of bring the track up and bring it down, with a sense of dynamic range that is, quite appreciable. I liked how they sounded and how we didn't overcomplicate those guitar lines to try and sort of like make solo sections in a track where we didn't necessarily need leads, because it was more about the environment and ambience than it is about trying to tell a story through those leads, aside from when they were there as per track 10 and stuff. The bass lines that we had, the synth sequences, or the more sort of fuzzy whole note synths, or track 7, I think, if I'm not mistaken, Interceptor, was my favorite one by far, just because that bass, that had so much personality and sort of pep and zazz to it. I love the fact that it danced around and buzzed around. It was just a good time. It was in a minor key, but it was exciting. It was like, oh, it's like a friend. It's a fun friend. It's kind of booping and dooping around the place. And it's rare that I feel that fond of a song. I like to feel like I'm having a good time with the music that I listen to, and it makes me feel genuinely unhappy when I don't. And it's just nice to have a song and an album where I feel a little bit elevated in a positive manner. And it's just nice to sort of like gel alongside that. That wasn't my experience with every track, but mostly because a lot of it was relatively conservative in regards to, like, there weren't as many fun instrument choices. And I know that's probably a contentious thing to say. It's just more that there were sensible ones. But that one just came out of nowhere, and it's like, oh, we're bouncing around there with a lot of the whole note and sort of like sustained notes we had throughout this. It was just nice to have something a bit more sort of peppy and kind of sort of opinionated, with a bit more sort of, personality to it. The drums were phenomenal. Really happy with the mixture of quarter 8, 16th, 32nd triplet grooves. There were some orchestral drums with some interesting sequences. They were played differently at different tempos relative to that. I feel I think I know the plugin they were using for it, if I'm not mistaken. But just the way that you explored the whole drum kit, including the hi-hats, rides, crashes, with some tom fills that worked as beats, but predominantly half-time 16th oriented snares, kicks, on beats, and sort of off beats, and with some occasional polymeter or polyrhythmic stuff on stuff like the hi-hats. A lot of the percussion was great. It was a really tight, almost metronomic performance. And generally, we just had a great sense of pace and cadence for stuff. There were some moments where like we had synth sequences and synth basses and other sort of elements there that were more sort of rhythmic, but they like, I think Coherence, if I'm not mistaken, went out of time, but that was a little everything. We've already spoken about that, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Typically stuff melded and meshed together really neatly. And it was just great to have a rhythm section and knew what it was doing. And again, all the different sort of like futuristic sounding synth pads and keys and arpeggiated plucks and stuff like that. And some of the sort of like the synth leads that just kind of flew over top without being a confrontational solo element, just simply being something to sort of like get lost in. You know, that was really neat. There was risers and sort of more sort of like noise fix, ambience kind of related stuff. I think some of the Foley sections might have even had a little bit of that noise in it. There were vocal chops as well that kind of provided a synthetic kind of flow to it. And with risers and other parts sort of bring us up, it's just, there's just too much to really sort of proportion here accurately. I want to say that I feel like each track was sufficiently decorated in these components to be interesting and enjoyable to listen through. And I feel like there was a sense of cohesion and across the entire album. And there's other bits of ear candy nuance I probably haven't mentioned here. I mean, I mentioned the Foley with the storm sounds and like the rain and everything like that as well. That was important. Just thematically, minor leaning unless it was major. There were extensions of certain parts and triodorants more in others. There were some chromaticisms and occasional modulations, but like that's just simply a part of sort of trying to add a bit of mystique or nuance to it. There was a song called Mystique where like it had like lots of different patterns and progressions, but a lot of these tracks had like two main parts that they kind of oscillated between. Some more smoothly than others, some had three, some were just a journey throughout the whole entire thing. It depended on the length and the scope and the kind of direction I wanted to go with it, but I'm glad that we had that kind of variation compositionally, and overall quite a strong performance across the instruments without, I know, out of place. Studio recording, mixing, and mastering was good. I'm really happy with the way things were presented within the stereo field. Left to right sides of the headphones, things like moved around the place, went from left to right, as well as the stereo frequency spectrum, should I say. Like there were no weird resonant frequencies. You just had the highs, high mids, low mids, and lows filled up there with a mixture of, again, cymbals and sort of like higher shimmers and choir parts all the way down to the sub basses. It was nice to have the drums sidechain a little bit. There was dynamic range, but it was also, I think it was pushed in the limiter there. It could just be the website I'm listening through kind of pushing it at full bore. I'm not sure what the lifts were mastered to are, but regardless, nice and loud, but a pumping bass compression limiting is handled. The vocals were not overproduced when we heard them in track number 10. I just think they sounded neatly. They could have potentially been a bit louder, but I also think because of a lack of production-based dynamic range in certain elements, we didn't maybe want to do that. They still sounded correctly, And there's no real applicable constructive critique for me. I mean, I've spoken about the lack of the coherence and the coherence part, but that's fine with the LFO rate on the synth with the drums, but that's fine. Final general listener's perspective, just had a great time listening through this. It's a long, listening through an album in a review section can be a long time, and it just makes me, feel happy when I listen to something I actually enjoy listening to. It's not always a given. Sometimes it's a bit of a struggle, but it wasn't the case with Jody Ellis and their album Ethereal. I say this genuinely. I think they've got some really special music here, and I wish them all the best and luck in future of the music endeavors. It was great to check out more of their stuff, because thank you for watching my review of this album from Jody Ellis titled Ethereal. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, please go show them some love via the various social medias, and I think it's on our website as well as probably on social medias. And stay cool and stay safe, and please remember to support your local musicians and artists supporting time as in to help more than ever to the crazy stuff going in the world. And I'll catch you in the next SP Reacts. Spiderhands out.